happy forever and ever
Zoinks!
and ever.
Who could that be? Who the hell could that be? God damn it. Who's there? Who is this?
Uncle Arlaki?
Who?
Plumber.
Plumber. I don't need a plumber.
Candygram.
Candygram? Well, what the hell's a candygram?
Grubhub?
Oh, great! Oh. Well, hello there, nieces and nephews, and welcome back to Uncle Orlok's Vault for our very special Summer of Screams episode. Join us as we're about to journey back to the sweltering summer of 1975, when a certain movie, made by a certain director who would soon after become a cinema icon, terrified the public out of the water, off the beaches, and into the air-conditioned darkness of a movie theater again and again. Not only was it one of the scariest movies ever made, but was also about to change Hollywood and the movie-going experience forever, becoming the first summer blockbuster. So, put on your sunscreen and watch out for a dorsal fin breaking the surface of the water, as we are about to look back 50 years at Steven Spielberg's horror masterpiece, Jaws.
It's a beautiful day. The beaches are open, and people are having a wonderful time. Amity is a summer town. I don't think you appreciate the gut reaction people have to these things. You yell barracuda, you're racist, huh? You yell shark, we've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
What we are dealing with here is a perfect engine, an eating machine.
In 1974, author Peter Benchley's Big Fish story hit bookshelves. Published by Doubleday, the novel quickly became a bestseller. But Benchley's inspiration for a killer shark story was a long time in the making. Growing up, Benchley used to spend his summers on Nantucket Island off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where he used to go shark fishing with his father and brother. His fascination with marine life was instilled from an early age. In fact, Nantucket became the model for the fictional resort town of Amity Island in the book. Benchley would also be inspired later on by a 1971 documentary called Blue Water, White Death, which vividly depicts the great white's lethal power. But the impetus of the story about a great white shark attacking and eating swimmers off the coast of a seaside resort would come from a true-life event about a series of shark attacks that happened in 1916 off the coast of New Jersey. These shark attacks took place over a 12-day period involving a series of incidents that instilled widespread fear. It was believed to be a great white shark that first came to Beach Haven that attacked a swimmer, then went up the coast attacking people in Spring Lake and Matawan, New Jersey, ultimately resulting in 4 fatalities. Benchley had the story, but when the book was finally ready for publication, he couldn't think of a title. His first attempts were much more esoteric, like The Stillness in the Water and Leviathan Rising. Finally, when talking it over with his editor, he came up with the simple but visceral title, Jaws, because he thought at least it fits well on a book cover jacket. Benchley's novel Jaws would remain on the New York Times bestseller list for an impressive 44 weeks. But while the novel was still in galleys form, a bidding war for the film rights quietly began. This is where producing team David Brown and Richard Zanuck, son of movie mogul Darryl F. Zanuck, come into the picture. They ended up outbidding Warner Brothers for the rights, and Zanuck-Brown Company instead set the picture up at competitor studio Universal Pictures. Zanuck and Brown had recently produced a string of mega hits including Patton, The French Connection, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and The Sting. David Brown said in a later interview that if they had reread the book a second time and realized how hard it was going to be to shoot a movie about a shark on the water, they might not have ever agreed to buy the rights. Benchley was brought on to adapt his novel into a screenplay and wrote 2 early drafts. But with Benchley being a novice screenwriter, Zanuck and Brown then brought on a renowned playwright and screenwriter named Howard Sackler, who had won the Pulitzer Prize for his play The Great White Hope, to rewrite the script. Sackler streamlined the plot quite a bit and was the first to add an early iteration of the USS Indianapolis backstory speech told by Quint, but more on that later. In the meantime, Zanuck and Brown needed to find a director. They first offered the job to respected veteran director John Sturges, who had made such classics as The Great Escape and The Magnificent Seven, but he declined. Next, they met with a young, up-and-coming filmmaker. No, not him quite yet. This guy was named Dick Richards. Richards, though, blew his opportunity when, in a meeting with Zanuck and Brown, he kept referring to the great white shark as the great white whale. While this was happening, a young 26-year-old director under contract at Universal named Steven Spielberg was in the producer's office and noticed a copy of the script sitting on top of a pile on the desk. Spielberg began his career in television, his first professional job directing Joan Crawford in an episode of Rod Serling's Night Gallery. He also directed the first episode of Columbo entitled Murder by the Book. His first real breakout, though, was a made-for-TV movie called Duel, which aired on ABC in 1971. Based on a Richard Matheson story and script, Duel saw Dennis Weaver being chased and terrorized by an unstoppable killer truck driver who remains unseen throughout. This simple story, which reached levels of terror and suspense, was recognized for its superior quality against most TV fare. It also demonstrated an early talent from the director for building tension and suspense with the diesel truck like an unstoppable leviathan hunting Dennis Weaver's everyman. Many elements of Duel are shared with Benchley's tale of an unstoppable shark. Spielberg's first theatrical feature was The Sugarland Express, starring Goldie Hawn, and was produced by Zanuck and Brown. The Sugarland Express had done well and received critical praise, especially from Pauline Kael, who called it one of the best debut films ever. But it was not a box office hit, so Spielberg was looking for a more popcorn film when he asked if he could read the Jaws script. After reading it, he asked if he could direct it, and Zanuck and Brown, still looking for a director, said, "Sure, why not?" Now that Spielberg was attached, he still wasn't happy with the latest draft of the script and rewrote a draft himself. Still not satisfied, though, with it, he asked to bring on his friend, writer and actor Carl Gottlieb. Gottlieb had started his career in improv comedy. He then cut his teeth as a staff writer on such hit comedy shows as The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, The Odd Couple, The Bob Newhart Show, and All in the Family. Gottlieb was hired initially as an actor to play the character Meadows, the local reporter and editor of the Amity Gazette. The rationale being that Spielberg could then have Gottlieb on set for rewrites, mostly punching up dialogue and building character moments. Little did Gottlieb realize that this easy-sounding gig would lead to him spending an entire spring and summer living in a house he would share with Spielberg on Martha's Vineyard, not only acting, but rewriting the script on a daily basis as production catastrophes would begin piling up. Gottlieb did streamline the plot even further, as Benchley's novel had several subplots that distracted from the main action. A couple of examples are, in the book, Larry Vaughn, the mayor of Amity, also had mob connections, making him even sleazier than he already is in the story. Another was that Martin Brody's wife, Ellen Brody, has an affair with ichthyologist Matt Hooper, who is described in the book as being tall and muscular with blonde hair and blue eyes. Obviously not the direction they went in the final casting. These subplots were wisely cut out, but not without the initial disconcert of author Peter Benchley. When Spielberg said in an early interview that the book had to be changed a lot to make the movie, Benchley tersely fired back in a separate interview, saying Spielberg would become known as one of the greatest second-unit directors, meaning that Spielberg knew how to stage action scenes that were cinematic but knew nothing of real-world characters. Benchley would obviously recant that statement later on. Next, Spielberg and his team had to cast the picture. He initially considered Charlton Heston to play the lead character of a former New York City cop who is afraid of the water, Chief Martin Brody, but correctly decided Heston's star power might overshadow the picture. Next, he made an offer to Robert Duvall, who declined, instead wanting to play Quint. Still not able to find his lead, he ran into character actor Roy Scheider at a party and told him about his picture and the problem with casting. Scheider, who was formerly an amateur boxer and had gotten recognition playing supporting roles in films like 1971's Klute, where he portrayed Jane Fonda's pimp, and the New York City crime drama The French Connection as Detective Cloudy Russo alongside Gene Hackman in 1974. Scheider looked at Spielberg and said, "Well, why don't you cast me?" before he ever even read a script. Spielberg looked at him and said, "Well, hey, sure, why not?" As Chief Martin Brody's wife, Spielberg cast Lorraine Gary, who was married to studio president and COO of Universal Pictures, Sid Sheinberg. This was a bit of good political casting and probably contributed to the reason production wasn't shut down when it eventually went way over schedule and budget. But Lorraine Gary is a very naturalistic actress and fit Ellen Brody's character. She would end up reprising her role in Jaws 2, and finally in the much-maligned Jaws: The Revenge in 1987. For the ichthyologist Matt Hooper, who comes into the story to help Brody with his shark problem, Spielberg first tried to cast an actor who fit Benchley's description of the character in the novel by going out to handsome, waspy leading man types like Jon Voight, Jeff Bridges, and Timothy Bottoms. But again, all declined. It was his friend George Lucas who recommended going in a different direction with the casting and suggested Richard Dreyfuss, whom he recently worked with on American Graffiti. Dreyfuss initially turned Spielberg down as well, saying he would rather see this movie than have to shoot it.
Richard Dreyfuss was my first choice.
And he said, "You want to do it?" And I said, "No." And he said, "What? Why?" I said, "Well, that's going to be a bitch to shoot.
He thought I was crazy to make the movie and tried to talk me out of making the movie.
I'm lazy, and I'd rather just watch it than shoot it."
Shortly after, Dreyfuss went to a screening of a movie he recently starred in and was about to hit theaters called The Apprenticeship of Duty Kravitz. Once he saw his performance on screen in that picture, he ran back to Spielberg and begged for the role of Hooper, hoping he could get on the picture before his career hit a brick wall. For the role of Shark Hunter, an eccentric old sea salt Quint, Spielberg went out with an offer to star Lee Marvin, who passed on the role. Then he went to Sterling Hayden, known for his tough guy characters in The Asphalt Jungle, and as the insane, cigar-chomping General Jack D. Ripper in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. Sterling would have been a solid choice, especially considering he was a fisherman in real life. but he also turned it down. This time, it was Zanuck and Brown who suggested British thespian Robert Shaw, whom they had just worked with on The Sting. Shaw was a classically trained actor who attended RADA and then began his career doing Shakespearean theater. He then moved into movies, appearing as a bad guy who fights James Bond on a train in From Russia with Love in 1963, and was nominated for an Academy Award for his turn as Henry VIII in the film A Man for All Seasons in 1966. Shaw was also an author and playwright who had won critical acclaim as a writer for his play The Man in the Glass Booth. Now, with these three diverse character actors cast in the leads, the stage was set for a perfect dichotomy on screen that would only accentuate the theme of man against nature. It's one of the many reasons Jaws is elevated beyond the standard horror fare. Screenwriter Carl Gottlieb described the dynamic between the three main characters as a trio of primal man, Quint, intellectual man, Hooper, and the everyman, Brody. He emphasized that these diverse strengths were necessary to overcome the shark, stating, quote, "One of them working alone couldn't kill the shark, but the three of them working together could." In supporting roles, the morally compromised and often frustratingly obtuse Mayor Larry Vaughn was played by character actor Murray Hamilton. Hamilton was a stage and screen actor who appeared in over 160 movie and television projects. Before playing Mayor Vaughn in Jaws, Spielberg took note of his performance as Mr. Robinson in The Graduate. Hamilton would reprise his role in Jaws 2 and was asked to return for Jaws the Revenge, but would unfortunately pass away before shooting began. Actor Jeff Kramer portrays Deputy Hendricks, who is referred to as Lenny in Jaws, but when he reprised his role in Jaws 2, Hendricks' first name miraculously changed to the actor's actual first name, as they kept referring to him as Jeff in that movie. Maybe Lenny had an identical twin brother who also worked on the Amity Police Force. As for the rest of the supporting cast, most of it was filled with local, non-professional actors. In many cases, Spielberg allowed these local characters to improvise some of their own dialogue, adding to a certain feeling of authenticity and local Massachusetts color.
What's the matter with you? Want to swap us, you crazy son of a bitch?
Yes, Chief. Now, we got a bunch of calls about that karate school. It seems that the 9-year-olds from the school have been karateing the picket fences. Chief Brody's office.
What is this bite radius crap?
That is a big mouth. Look at
All I'm
it.
trying to stuff your friggin' head in there, man, and find out if it's a man eater, all right?
Some of these local Martha's Vineyard cast members include Jonathan Filley, who played the young man who meets Chrissy Watkins and tried to go skinny dipping with her before her fatal swim. Filley would end up establishing a career in the film industry as a production manager in New York. He would eventually serve as unit production manager on another Spielberg film, 2005's War of the Worlds. For the role of Ben Gardner, technically the third victim of the shark, was portrayed by local fisherman Craig Kingsbury, who was a solid gold resource for Spielberg. He would allow Kingsbury to cut loose with improvised lines of dialogue.
When we get them silly bastards down in that rock pile, there'll be some fun. They'll wish their fathers had never met their mothers when they start taking their bottoms out and slamming into them rocks, boy.
Kingsbury was a familiar eccentric on the vineyard, rarely wearing shoes, and would end up working with Robert Shaw, assisting with his construction of Quint's scene-stealing performance. Kingsbury enjoyed the job so much that he'd concoct stories out of whole cloth that he would tell Robert Shaw, and Shaw would then repeat as truth. The most famous tale being that the majority of Martha's Vineyard Islanders were secretly inbred, something that Shaw then relayed in a TV interview.
I don't think that's funny at all, I'm sorry.
But Kingsbury's most memorable scene is as Ben Gardner's dead corpse, whose head pops out of the hull of his boat in the most frightening jump scare. It was actually a plaster head made of Kingsbury by the production. But probably the best performance delivered by a local was that of Lee Fierro, who portrayed Mrs. Kittner, the mother of Alex Kittner, the little boy who is the second fatal victim of the shark. She delivers a brief monologue when she confronts Chief Brody about allowing people to go swimming when he knew there was a dangerous shark lurking in the waters.
Chief Brody?
Yes?
I just found out that a girl got killed here last week. And you knew it. You knew there was a shark out there. You knew it was dangerous. But you let people go swimming anyway.
It's a scene that adds gravitas to the story, and again elevates the film beyond usual B horror movie fare, where the weight of a character's death and its consequences are felt on screen. Fierro was a local, but not an amateur. She was a professional actress. From 1974 to 2017, Fierro was artistic director of the Island Theater Workshop in Martha's Vineyard, where she mentored hundreds of aspiring actors.
Many people have asked me to slap them, please. They have come from all over, and they ask me to slap them.
Besides the local talent, the actual island of Martha's Vineyard was cast as the main location for the fictional Amity Island for several reasons. One being that the look of the island itself fits the feel of Benchley's book, especially the small village of Edgartown on the east side of the island, which has a quaint New England aesthetic. Other parts of the island were used, including one vacant lot near the harbor where production designer Joe Alves built Quint's shack completely for the production. The structure itself was built to code, but because the piling was over the water, Alves' construction was in violation of local zoning laws. Once realizing the authorities had to give him 6 weeks to remove the structure, they just decided to shoot the scene within that time frame before tearing it down. The other geological feature that made Martha's Vineyard appealing to the production was that it's the only place on the eastern coast where the surrounding ocean has a flat, sandy bottom 12 miles out away from the island. Spielberg wanted to make sure that for all the scenes where the three main characters hunt the shark out at sea on the Orca in the second half of the movie, they would look completely isolated. He wanted to be able to point his camera in any direction, full 360 degrees, without seeing the coastline. Also, for the mechanical shark to operate in these scenes, they needed a consistent, flat, sandy bottom. Also, the ocean is relatively shallow there as well, reaching depths of only 30 to 35 feet. This would facilitate the track, or, quote, sea sled, on the ocean floor that ran beneath the mechanical shark, which in turn was attached to a large metal arm so it could glide, dive, and emerge from different depths in the water. Creating the shark and shooting on the open sea would become the biggest hurdles for the production and ultimately lead to all the delays and difficulties that they later faced. Originally, Zanuck and Brown had the crazy idea that they could use a real great white shark, thinking that, like dolphins, they could be trained, like the marine mammals used in Flipper and the movie The Day of the Dolphin.
The ball will hurt man. No.
But not only are sharks giant fish, not mammals, experts quickly pointed out that training a real shark to perform on camera and on cue would be impossible and dangerous. So they decided to design and build a mechanical shark, 3 of them to be specific. Production designer Joe Alves had drawn concept art of the shark for the picture, and during pre-production worked closely with Spielberg from the script to storyboard many of the ambitious shark sequences. Therefore, Alves was tasked with the design. They settled on the shark being 25 feet long, and each of the 3 mechanical sharks would be used for different functions and camera angles.
That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons of them.
To execute these designs and actually build the mechanical sharks, veteran special effects wizard Bob Matty was brought out of retirement. Matty had worked for Walt Disney for many years, creating practical effects for movies like Mary Poppins, and he created the giant squid for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Matty and his team were given little time to complete the task before the mechanical sharks would be needed on location for the start of production. The 3 mechanical versions of the shark were completed, including a 4th rig that was just the dorsal fin and the tail that could be pulled through the water. Nothing like this had ever been done before. Spielberg famously ended up naming the mechanical shark Bruce, after his lawyer Bruce Raymer. So proud was Spielberg initially of his star shark, he brought his buddies George Lucas and filmmaker John Milius into the workshop hangar at night to show Bruce off to them. The shark, not the lawyer. Lucas, being a gearhead, wanted to get a look at the mechanics inside Bruce, and ended up sticking his head all the way into the shark's mouth. As a prank, Milius goaded Spielberg to use the controls to close the jaws on Lucas. But when they did this, it malfunctioned and Lucas became stuck inside the mouth. Spielberg and Milius had to pull him out by his feet. The 3 of them then ran out of the hangar like naughty children, thinking they had broken the prop. This incident ended up foreshadowing the problems that were to plague the production once on location. Production began in May 1975 on Martha's Vineyard, and deceptively started smoothly as they decided to shoot all the land scenes first. Because of problems with the shark when testing it in the ocean, they kept pushing the shark scenes back on the schedule, instead shooting everything around it. The opening scene was originally written to show the shark, but instead ended up as a masterclass of how to terrify an audience within the first 3 minutes, while hiding the monster and creating a sense of mystery as to what the actual size of the shark is by not showing it. After the opening shot showing the point of view of the shark lurking under the water, establishing its presence, we cut to a group of young people hanging out and hooking up on the beach at dusk. Chrissy Watkins flirts with a young Tom Cassidy. He runs after her as she takes her clothes off to go skinny dipping. Tom, too drunk to follow her into the water, collapses by the surf. This scene was actually shot day for night, meaning it was photographed in daylight with a filter over the camera lens to make it look dark. As in real life, sharks tend to come into shore to feed usually near dusk and dawn. When Spielberg and cinematographer Bill Butler first viewed the dailies of the underwater shot, they quickly realized they had to darken it even further, as the audience would be able to see a little too much of the nude actress. Chrissy Watkins was played by actress and stunt swimmer Susan Baccalini. In later interviews, Baccalini likened her character to Janet Leigh's in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, considering her early horrific demise, and being naked in the water alone, equally vulnerable like Janet Leigh in the shower. To create the violent attack in the water, Baccalini was fastened into a harness which went around her waist, and 2 large stuntmen pulled her from right to left and then tugged her under to simulate the crashing a large shark would do to its prey. It's a truly frightening sequence. Baccalini's screams and John Williams' score sell the reality of the sequence. The compelling direction of the scene, as well as others in Jaws, is Spielberg's ability to put the audience into the perspective of the character on screen. You, the audience, are in the character's position. Spielberg accomplished this by shooting the scene and others at water level. The camera is at the same perspective a person would have when swimming in the ocean, where you can't quite get above the surface to see what's below. This was achieved by cinematographer Bill Butler, who built a special watertight box for the camera to go inside. There was a glass on one side of the box for the camera lens to shoot at water level. Then the box operated by floating on the surface. Not only is it ingenious, but one of the many reasons Jaws feels so visceral on screen. The scene is explosive in its implied violence, never showing the shark or the gore the audience imagines is happening just under the surface of the water. Finally, she's pulled under, and the water is calm. Only the sound of the surf lapping the shore remains. The scene ends on a shot of the horizon, then dissolves, transitioning to a graphic match of the same horizon later the next morning as the back of Martin Brody's head comes up into frame, introducing our main character. These are some of the brilliant directing choices the 26-year-old Spielberg was already demonstrating. In fact, many scenes in the picture show the visual auteur stamps that Spielberg would become known for much later, like the Spielberg Oneer. An early scene when Brody gets on a ferry boat to go out and warn a troop of Boy Scouts swimming for their merit badges to come in, but instead is confronted by Mayor Vaughn Meadows and the medical examiner, demonstrates a perfect Spielberg Oneer. It's so subtle, most audiences may not even notice it. The whole dialogue scene is played out in one shot. No edits or cutaways. But what keeps the scene visually interesting is Spielberg's blocking of the actors in relation to the camera. For one, the scene is wisely staged at an interesting location, a moving ferry. The background is always changing with the movement of the ferry boat. The frame starts in a wide shot, but as the dialogue progresses, the actors move closer into a medium shot. And then finally, Brody and Vaughn walk into a close-up when the dialogue becomes more conspiratorial. Essentially, it's 3 shots in one, accentuating the drama of what is being said.
You yell Barracuda. You're racist, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Another scene which could be considered a masterclass in direction is another early scene on the beach shown from Brody's perspective. He knows there's a shark somewhere out there, but the beachgoers don't. Brody anxiously watching. The suspense of the scene builds by hiding the edits, transitioning Brody's POV to his reaction shots. Objects close to the foreground wipe past, allowing the edits to be seamless. Each time we cut back to Brody, the frame is tighter on him. There is even a POV shot as Brody looks past a man talking to him at 2 kids in the water, the girl play screaming. This was achieved using a split diopter lens, which keeps both the foreground and the kids in the background in crisp focus. The scene finally builds to the fatal shark attack of the little boy Alex Kittner. A few moments earlier, we saw him plead with his mother to allow him to go out swimming just a little longer.
Alex Kittner, they're beginning to prune.
Just let me go out a little longer.
Just 10 more minutes.
Which adds to the impact when everyone else runs out of the water except for Mrs. Kittner's child. The quick cuts of the attack are just enough to be brutal without languishing in gore. The shark POV, a recurring device. At this moment of horror and realization for Chief Brody, Spielberg uses the famous Hitchcockian technique of dollying the camera in while simultaneously zooming out, which creates this bizarre stretching sensation. There's even a great moment of subtle performance choice when Chief Brody, as you see here, who we know is afraid of the water, briefly looks down at his feet as they touch the surf. The film is full of these subtle flourishes, but as production continued and they started to run out of things to shoot on land or without showing the shark, the stresses on Spielberg were about to become manifold. Bruce the shark was still not working. Part of the problem was that because the construction of the shark was rushed by the studio, who wanted an earlier start date, the mechanical shark was only tested in fresh water. It was never ocean tested. This meant that the salt water brutalized and degraded the internal mechanics as well as the polyurethane skin. Special effects technician Roy Arbogast and his team were tasked with the upkeep and repairs on Bruce. Their job turned into a never-ending nightmare. Then, sometimes when the shark would finally be working, it was the weather and the ocean that was knocking them about, preventing them from filming. At this point, production had to move on to shooting all the action in the second half of the movie, which exclusively takes place on the water on the Orca. Originally, Spielberg wanted to lock down the camera for these scenes on sticks, meaning a tripod, but DP Bill Butler pointed out that locking the camera down on a moving boat that is constantly rocking up and down with the tides will make the entire audience seasick. Instead, they decided to have all the scenes on the Orca shot with a handheld camera, expertly operated by Michael Chapman, who would go on himself to become a renowned cinematographer, utilizing his legs and knees to compensate for the movements at sea. This is before the Steadicam. A flotilla of about 16 boats and barges were used to shoot the orca scenes on the ocean. Some of these were a tugboat called the Whitefoot, which served as the mothership, restaurant, base, and towboat. The SS Garage Sail, a large raft with a roof that housed dressing rooms, compressors, diving gear, a rest room, lumber, tools, and controls for the mechanical shark, including a special box for working its jaws. The old city of Chappaquiddick, which functioned as the electrical barge, carrying lights, cameras, and other equipment, and the actual orca itself, which was a converted lobster boat originally named Warlock, plus many other smaller boats surrounding this armada. Despite all this, the ocean was brutal with its ever-changing currents. Just when they would get a shot lit and lined up with the actors, the crew, the shark, etc., the currents would change and sometimes pull all the different boats and barges away from each other in different directions. And if they were lucky with a calm weather day at sea, fishing boats or boats with summer tourists would sometimes appear way in the background, ruining the shot. You see, this is all before CGI. Today they could digitally paint out the boats on the horizon in post. But when Jaws was being made, it meant either move the shot and relight, which could take forever on the moving ocean, or wait for the boat all the way in the distance to move across and out of frame. Sometimes they could wait 20 minutes for a boat to move across the horizon, only for another to suddenly appear. Sometimes the AD, or assistant director, would send his other assistants out in motorboats to ask the fishermen or tourists to hold back for the shot. According to Richard Zanuck, he said some would be cooperative and others would say, "Go fuck yourself."
Parker. And action.
Gun doesn't work.
Cut.
This excruciating process meant that on some days, they would only accomplish getting about 3 shots in the can.
The people in Edgartown and on the vineyard have been great to us, but the sea conditions have been so impossible that it's really hurt our schedule and, put a general somber note behind the scenes on the production, because we've been here 105 shooting days. And we were only scheduled for something like 65 or 70.
What's this done to the budget of the picture?
Well, it's kicked it up another $1.5 million, unfortunately.
This all led to Universal Pictures president and Spielberg's mentor, Sid Sheinberg, flying to Martha's Vineyard to the set. He sat Spielberg down and said that they could shut down the picture or shoot the rest of it in a tank at the Universal lot. But Spielberg, being a perfectionist and knowing his whole future career was riding on this movie, convinced Sheinberg to let him keep going until they finished. Meanwhile, because Bruce still wouldn't come out of his trailer most of the time, Carl Gottlieb would sit down with Spielberg every night after shooting at their cottage and rewrite the next day's shooting script so it didn't require the shark to be seen as much. Some of these rewrite sessions included all 3 lead actors as well involved with dialogue rewrites. One of the conceits that helped with this and added more suspense to the picture were the barrels Quint harpoons the shark with. The barrels not only allowed production to shoot scenes involving the shark without seeing the shark, it also became a device that told us, the audience, when the shark was present whenever the barrels would resurface. It also illustrated the power and strength of the Leviathan every time it could dive under into the depths with additional barrels attached.
They're up again! Now what?
Spielberg's original storyboard showed Jaws was never intended to be a movie where the shark is not seen for the first hour and 21 minutes. But because of these technical limitations, it forced the young Spielberg and his collaborators to come up with more imaginative sequences which elevated the picture above just being a typical monster movie and into a more suspenseful Hitchcockian tone. One of these scenes, rewritten around the table in Spielberg and Gottlieb's cottage, which involved the actors' input, was the drinking and bonding scene at night on the Orca. This included Quint's famous Indianapolis speech.
You were on the Indianapolis?
What happened?
The The Indianapolis speech is based on a real historical event that happened in 1945 near the end of World War II. This being the 50th anniversary of Jaws, it is also the 80th anniversary of the sinking of the Indianapolis. As told in the film by Quint, the USS Indianapolis was a U.S. Navy cruiser that played a significant role in World War II, most notably for secretly delivering the atomic bomb components to Tinian Island. Specifically, it was the components for the bomb named, quote, Little Boy, which would be dropped on Hiroshima. On July 30th, 1945, after delivering the bomb and en route to the Philippines, the Indianapolis was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and sank within minutes.
1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about half an hour. Tiger, 13-footer. You know that when you're in the water, Chief? You tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail.
Apparently, sharks were attracted to the site of the sinking because of the explosions and the blood and thrashing in the water. Survivors reported seeing sharks circling and attacking, with some describing the sharks as relentless and aggressive. Once bleeding men were in the water, it became a feeding frenzy for the circling sharks below.
Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you. Right into your eyes. You know the thing about a shark? He's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you. And those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red. In spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in and they rip you to pieces.
The event is widely considered the worst shark attack in history due to the sheer number of victims and the duration of the attack, which lasted 4 days and 5 nights. The sinking of the Indianapolis also remains the greatest single loss of life at sea in the history of the U.S. Navy, with only 316 survivors out of a crew of 1,196 men. As mentioned earlier, it was writer Howard Sackler who had originally added a version of the speech to his draft of the script to help give Quint's character motivation for his Ahabian obsession with killing the shark. It also became a fatalistic symbol for Quint, perhaps a result of survivor's guilt that death was finally coming for him in the form of a shark. Carl Gottlieb ended up doing a rewrite, but Spielberg still wasn't satisfied. He asked his friend, writer-director John Milius to take a crack at it. Milius ended up turning in a 7-page long monologue which actor Robert Shaw knew would be too much for an audience to sustain interest. Finally, Shaw himself, being an accomplished novelist and playwright, asked Spielberg if he could take a crack at rewriting the monologue. What Robert Shaw wrote ended up as the final monologue which he, as Quint, delivers in the film. But of course, all didn't go completely smoothly with the shooting of the monologue either. Shaw, well known for imbibing copious amounts of alcohol, not unlike his contemporary British thespians Richard Harris, Richard Burton, and Peter O'Toole,
I sing no more now till I've had a drink.
Asked Spielberg if he could have a couple of drinks before shooting the scene, since the character was supposed to be somewhat drunk. Spielberg, being young, made the mistake as director of saying okay to Shaw's request.
And he did come to me and ask for my permission to have a few drinks before he shot the scene, because it was described that the boys were imbibing quite liberally, and they were, got to the point where they could giddily compare their battle scars. And I foolishly said, yeah, go ahead and have a couple of drinks. But, as we all know, we're not supposed to do that anywhere. And Robert went off and had some drinks. And then an hour went by, and we had the camera set up, and all of a sudden I saw Robert coming back on the ship, the Orca, from a support boat, and there were 2 crew members. One had him under one arm, the other had him on the other arm.
When it came time to shoot the scene, 2 crew members had to carry Shaw onto the boat as he was so sloshed.
No, the only time I'm ever drunk is on television. I'm never drunk in private life or at work, or we all know that. I mean,
Needless to say, he couldn't perform the scene in any acceptable manner. Shaw, embarrassed, called Spielberg in the middle of the night and contritely begged for another chance. The next day, Spielberg set up 2 cameras to cover the scene. Shaw showed up sober and performed the now classic scene.
So, 1,100 men went in the war. 316 men come out. The Sharks took the rest June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
As the tedious production of Jaws stretched on, originally scheduled for 55 days, and would end up shooting 159 days, the daily stresses on the cast and crew built up, epitomized by the now legendary friendly feud between Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss. Dreyfuss, who was young and cocky, and Shaw, who was older and mercurial, had a deep respect for one another as actors, but also a competitive antagonism, which was fueled by the generational difference and difficult production. Shaw got satisfaction out of giving Dreyfuss the business, criticizing the 27-year-old for being out of shape and saying that he bet Dreyfuss couldn't even do 20 push-ups. Shaw would also dare him to dive into the ocean from the crow's nest of the Orca. This competition worked its way into the movie. As Dreyfuss tells it, one day it might have been pushed too far.
We're sitting at the top of the Orca, and he's got a scotch or something. And he's coming down the ladder, and he says to me, "Help me out, will you, Richard?" And I went, "You really want me to help you out, Robert?" He says, "Yeah." And I took the drink and threw it into the water. And every drinker on that crew, 150 guys, they all went, "Ooh." And he went behind the camera and took the fire hose. And that thing hit me right in the face, and it's the only time in the entire film that I lost my sense of humor.
Full throttle! Don't have to take this abuse much longer.
But perhaps the wildest and most dangerous catastrophe to befall the production was the day the Orca sank with cast and crew on board. They were shooting one of the many barrel chases when the barrels go under the Orca, being pulled at high speed. Unfortunately, on this specific take, the barrels ended up ripping through the hull of the Orca from beneath, filling the picture boat with water, and the Orca began to sink 12 miles out in the middle of the ocean.
They said, the Orca's sinking, the Orca, and you rush up there.
And he said, "Bill, the Orca is apparently sinking." Apparently sinking? It was going down like a rock.
The planking out from the hull of the Orca, and of course the water rushed in.
And we started to sink. Water started rushing onto the boat. Freddie Zendar jumps up from the hold, cursing and screaming in Austrian, and starts to power the boat as fast as he could toward the beach of Chappaquiddick Island, hoping to be able to ground the boat before it sinks and we have no Orca. In the meantime, we're in 6-foot swells, and Steven Spielberg is trying to send safety boats to get us transferred off the boat. Get the actors off the boat! Get the actors off the boat!
I remember John Carter, who won an Academy Award, by the way, for Best Sound for Jaws. He picked up the Niagara. He was on the boat and held over his head and said, "Fuck the actors, save the sound department." And I had this image to this day of John sinking, holding the Niagara over his head, the water up to John's ankles, up to his knees, boat scrambling to pull everybody off the sinking Orca, and John with his Niagara going under.
As the production finally reached its end on Martha's Vineyard, it came time to shoot the big finale. Now, in the novel Jaws, the shark is killed in a very anticlimactic way. It sinks to the bottom of the ocean and with Quint attached, not unlike Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, and Quint drowns with it. Spielberg knew the audience deserved a more exciting ending. Quint would now meet his fate inside the jaws of the Leviathan in a brutal scene straight out of a nightmare. Then, with the Orca sinking, this time it was actually rigged up by the special effects team to do so in a controlled way, Brody would kill the beast in a more spectacular way. It was the idea of Spielberg's filmmaker friends Matthew Robbins and Hal Barwood, both of whom had written the screenplay for Spielberg's first theatrical feature, The Sugar Land Express, who came up with the idea of Brody shoving a compressed air tank into the shark's mouth, then shooting it and blowing the giant fish to smithereens. Spielberg loved it. Benchley, not so much. At first.
The most interesting conflict, as far as I'm concerned, happened between me and Stephen when it came to the discussion of the ending. Because he said to me, the ending of the book is a downer. That is not a big, rousing ending, and I need a big, rousing ending. He said, if I have got them for 2 hours, they will believe whatever I do for the next 3 minutes, because I've got them in my hands, and I want the audience on their feet screaming. At the end, yes, yes, yes.
Yes! 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 Fire, you son of a...
But Spielberg, fearing the exhausted crew would toss him into the drink after the last shot was completed, instead got out of Dodge and was actually in Boston sitting with Richard Dreyfuss at a bar when that explosion shot was finally filmed. With the production on Martha's Vineyard finally completed, Spielberg describes having a complete panic attack and nervous breakdown immediately after.
Every time I fall asleep, I dreamt I was on the 3rd or 4th day of shooting. I wake up with an electrical explosion in my brain. My heart beating, can't catch my breath, looking around the room, where am I, disoriented. I calm down, get a glass of water, go back to sleep again. Same dream. I'm on the 4th day of shooting. And I know I've got another 100, and 46 days left. And I wake up again, same thing. And this thing was just, haunting me all night long, so I didn't get any sleep.
But back in Hollywood, there would still be 3 more weeks of shooting, plus post-production. Some of this additional shooting included the sequence when Matt Hooper is in the shark cage. This sequence was shot in a tank at Universal Studios, with one of the Bruces working fully in fresh water. Dreyfuss, though, was doubled in this scene by stuntman Dick Warlock, who would go on later to play the Shape, Michael Myers, in Halloween 2. So technically what you're seeing in this sequence is Jaws versus Michael Myers. This tank footage with Warlock and the large mechanical shark was intercut with second unit footage shot in Australia by Ron and Valerie Taylor of real great white sharks attacking a miniature cage. The Taylors were a husband and wife team who were renowned divers and underwater cinematographers who had worked on Blue Water White Death. They were hired to capture these second unit shots of real great whites by Universal. Because the fictitious shark in Jaws is supposed to be a whopping 25 feet, and the largest of the great white sharks they were able to lure in were 16 feet max, they used a smaller cage to make the real sharks look bigger. Of course, this meant bringing in a 4'1" stuntman Carl Rizzo, who had doubled for Elizabeth Taylor in 1944's National Velvet. But being an experienced equestrian did not prepare the nervous Rizzo for getting into scuba gear and being lowered in a cage into shark-infested waters. It didn't take long for Rizzo to freak out and refuse to get back in the cage with the sharks. Good thing too, because as soon as Rizzo got out of the cage and onto the boat, and while underwater cameras were still rolling, a shark attacked the cage, got stuck, and ended up pulling the cage down from the side of the boat and sinking it to the bottom of the ocean floor. This violent footage was used in the final film. Editor Verna Fields was able to take all of this footage from production, some with only a few seconds of the mechanical shark working properly, and at the Moviola constructed the film into a suspenseful and believable adventure horror film. It was Fields' sense of pacing, intercutting, and screen direction that Spielberg credits as a major contributor for bringing Jaws out of being a disastrous production and onto the screen as an exciting story. Spielberg and his other filmmaker friends lovingly referred to the veteran film editor as Mother Cutter.
What are we looking for? Well, we're looking for a nice place to show that Quint refuses to slow down the boat. That's the spot, Steve.
Another sequence rewritten in post by Gottlieb and reshot to be much scarier was Brody and Hooper's discovery of Ben Gardner's boat. The scene, which was originally written to take place on the water in daylight, was reconceived to happen instead at night, with Hooper taking a very drunk Brody out onto the water to find the great white while in its nocturnal feeding pattern. In the process, they come upon Ben Gardner's chewed-up boat. Setting the scene now at night on the foggy water makes the sequence much spookier and different from other scenes in the film. This was shot in the man-made pond on the Universal backlot. But while still in the edit, Spielberg was not satisfied with the timing of Ben Gardner's head popping out of the hole. He wanted the audience to jump out of their seats. So he ended up doing a quick pickup shot of Ben Gardner's head popping out of the hole in Verna Fields' backyard swimming pool right next to the editing room. Another quick pickup was the tight shot of the wooden hull being violently smashed by the shark and water coming through the slats. This was actually shot as a partial set reconstruction in production designer Joe Alves' driveway. Once all the pieces were finally put together and the picture edit was locked, it was time for renowned and now iconic composer John Williams to step in. Spielberg, being a longtime fan of Williams' work as a film composer, hired him to score his first theatrical feature, The Sugar Land Express. This time, Williams would surprise Spielberg with what he had in mind.
Well, he called me up and he said, I've got the theme for Jaws. Come over and listen to it on the piano. And I came running over to Johnny's house, and Johnny sat down at the piano, and Johnny was really excited to preview this for me. And he takes a couple of fingers, not all 10, just a couple. He didn't need all 10. And he goes, da-dun, 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 da-dun. Dun, 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 dun. I started laughing. No, Johnny said, no, I'm serious.
And I said, I think, well, Stephen, we'll try it. With the cellos and basses of the orchestra. Even one note. And G-true, you know, and so on. But I was thinking, what could be the simplest possible thing? It has to be low because the shark is very deep. It has to be something that, when it's approaching you, it is completely unstoppable. There isn't a force on earth that's going to stop a shark in his attack from you. But another big issue with us was that if you play this very softly and slowly, you advertise or you advance the thought that the shark is there just by hearing the music. There's no shark nearby, but if it speeds up and comes closer to you and gets louder and louder, the same two notes. You've got an actor that you can't see, and a threat that you, by some primordial instinct, you're threatened by, as we should be, by a great predator.
And the shark wasn't working anyway, so I didn't have a shark. But Johnny sort of saved the movie because he became the shark, and the music substituted for the absent shark.
With the picture cut, scored, and mixed, it was time for Universal to test this movie that had gone 300% over its original budget on preview audiences to see if it had sea legs.
Smoking loge is sold out, seats downstairs in the first 7 rows only.
At the first preview screening held at the Medallion Theater in Dallas, Texas, the producers, and especially Spielberg, with his whole future career on the line, watched with anxiety the audience reaction from the back of a packed house.
I had no idea commercially how it would perform. Of course, the movie lost all this money, and the 157 days of shooting was for naught, and the studio was, in the red, then of course I probably wouldn't have gotten another job.
Stephen and I were sitting next to each other, and we had never seen or heard an audience reaction.
I was too nervous to watch it from my seat, so I watched most of the movie from right near the curtain. So if it wasn't going well, I could just take one step back and I would be out in the lobby.
And we both clutched each other on the arm when that first scream happened.
When the little boy is taken on the raft, the scene where the shark comes up and the boy is brought underwater, a person got up, started to leave, and I thought, oh my God, my first walkout. And the person began to run. Went, oh my God, it's not a walkout, it's a run out. He's fleeing the premises. And the person passed me, heading for the restroom, didn't make it, and threw up on the floor of the lobby of the Medallion Theater. And I thought, at that point, I thought, oh my God, I've gone too far. I should have edited this picture more. What have I done? But then when the audience started making noise and going crazy and screaming and yelling and clapping after every big scene, I knew that I could go to work again.
I don't know, I'm still pretty wheezy from the movie. It's really realistic, it's really crazy.
And I definitely won't be going in now.
Ever again?
Never. I won't even paddle in the water anymore.
Sid Sheinberg decided to release the movie wide on over 400 screens across the country. In doing so, on June 20th, 1975, a terror from the deep would be unleashed upon summer audiences, and as a result, would initiate the era of the Hollywood blockbuster.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
What we are dealing with here is a perfect engine, an eating machine. We're not only going to have to close the beach, we're going to have to hire somebody to kill the shark.
Bad fish, but I'll catch him and kill him.
Did you hear your father? Out of the water now!
This shark, swallow you whole.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons on him.
Hold it up, he's coming straight for us. Don't screw it up now. Don't wait for me. Now! Shoot! What's he do? Give him room! I can't, he's trying to run! Oh! Come quick! I can't hold it! Hurry! Break it up! Hurry!
None of man's fantasies of evil can compare with the reality of Jaws. Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Jaws. See it before you go swimming.
Jaws thrilled, terrified, and excited audiences at every screening, inspiring them to return for repeated viewings. Jaws devoured the box office, eating up ticket receipts and surpassing all box office records that came before it, breaking the $100 million mark, which had never been done before. It spent 14 weeks at the #1 spot. Jaws became more than just a hit movie, it was a cultural phenomenon. For Spielberg, it made him a household name, and from here on, he could get practically any picture he wanted made in Hollywood and have the coveted final cut on his pictures. Jaws would also receive Academy Awards for John Williams' score, Verna Field's editing, and Best Sound. It would also receive a nomination for Best Picture, but The one accolade that would evade Spielberg for decades would be an Oscar for Best Director. In fact, for Jaws, he didn't even get a nomination.
For Nashville, Paramount, and Milos Forman.
Oh, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I wasn't nominated. I got beaten out by Fellini.
Spielberg would eventually win a Best Director Oscar 18 years later for Schindler's List. Of course, after the biggest hit of all time, Universal wanted a sequel. Spielberg wisely turned it down and would go on next to make 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, again with Richard Dreyfuss. Jaws 2, released in 1978, would instead be directed by Janos Schwark. Roy Scheider, who was under contract to Universal, begrudgingly returned as Chief Brody, but famously did not enjoy making the picture.
Jaws 2, was that a decision you had to wrestle with, whether or not you wanted to do the sequel to...
I didn't have any choice. I was contracted.
Oh, okay.
It was not my choice.
Lorraine Gary, Murray Hamilton, and Jeff Kramer also returned in their roles, whereas Jaws felt more like a high-sea adventure with dynamic characters. Jaws 2 is more like a slasher film on the water as the shark picks off bland teenagers. Interestingly, Jaws 2 would be released only months before John Carpenter's original Halloween, which would officially kick off the slasher era. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, Jaws 2 received mixed to negative reviews, but was a success at the box office, though nowhere near the hit of the original. It has since found a cult following. The box office success resulted, of course, in the studio next wanting Jaws 3D. Originally, it was conceived to be a spoof made by National Lampoons with Gremlins director Joe Dante at the helm, and would be titled Jaws 3 People Zero. Now, I would have loved to have seen Jaws get the Gremlins 2 treatment, but the studio scrapped that idea, instead going for the bland SeaWorld set Jaws 3D, capitalizing on the 3D craze that year in 1983. This time, production designer Joe Alf sat in the director's chair, but the result was even more diminished than Jaws 2. Jaws 3D got bad reviews, but made a decent profit, though much less than the other two films. But no matter how many times they blew up, electrocuted, and exploded the shark once again, another great white seemed to have it out for the Brody family, which is what happened in 1987 with Jaws: The Revenge. This time it was personal, and Ellen Brody, once again played by Lorraine Gary, was going to take on the shark. The picture also starred Mario Van Peebles and Michael Caine, who came along to collect a check. The plot of Jaws: The Revenge is absurd, and in a not-so-bad-it's-good type of way. The film is actually kind of depressing and boring. The shark does manage to roar like a dinosaur at the end, though. The reviews for Jaws: The Revenge were abysmal, and this pretty much ended the franchise. But putting the sequels aside, the cultural legacy of Jaws has never waned or diminished, resulting in the iconic shark being added to the Universal Studios backlot tour in 1976, and is still there in Hollywood. Also, from 1990 to 2012, Jaws: The Ride was a main feature at Universal Studios theme park in Orlando, Florida. Having been on the Jaws ride in the 90s, it was an off-the-hook experience of practical effects that proved, like the original film, extremely difficult to run with constant breakdowns. There are videos on YouTube that cover the history of the Jaws ride, and you should check those out if interested. Movies from Deep Blue Sea to The Shallows, The Reef, Open Water, The Meg, and even the Sharknado movies all owe a nod to the original Jaws. Often imitated but never surpassed, Jaws has held the public's collective imagination over the decades, and for the 50th anniversary came back to theaters, including IMAX on August 29, 2025. Now held as a classic, Jaws was inducted into the Library of Congress's National Film Registry in 2001, selected for the registry based on its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance, recognizing the film's enduring importance to American culture. And if this long video isn't enough to quench your thirst for behind-the-scenes knowledge on Jaws, pick up a copy of Carl Gottlieb's The Jaws Log, which is one of the best books ever written about the making of a movie. Maybe what makes Jaws so enduring is that it taps into that primal fear we as humans have of sharks whenever we go in the ocean. These prehistoric leviathans from the deep with razor-sharp teeth. The image buried in our collective psyche of the large mouth opening beneath us when we are vulnerable in the water, ready to tear us apart and eat us alive. It's as if God made the devil and gave him Jaws. Well, that's it for our Summer of Scares 50th anniversary special celebrating Jaws. If you would like to see more shows like this, please like and subscribe, and make sure to tell your friends to watch. Now, if you would excuse me, I'm going to finally sit back and catch some rays. What's that? Oh, hey, it's Gull Mail. Why, it's Chekhov, the seagull. Oh, Chekhov, how are you? Oh, what do you got there, boy? Oh, let me see. Oh, what's this? Oh, thank you. Oh, we got something exciting maybe coming up. Let's see. For the next show, I got something that's creepy and kooky and altogether spooky. It's the untold history of the Addams Family. Coming up next time on Uncle Orlok's Vault. So join us then, nieces and nephews. And remember, stay cool. Coochie coo, baby. Son of a bitch.